How are you, Kevin?
I am good, yes.
You are very fit. So are you a big fan of Charmed?
This is Greg Vaughn, a.k.a. Dan Gordon. You're listening to Words of Witches.
Your Charmed area is now my sanitizer area.
Okay, well...
I can't even get to my little, I don't know if you can see, I have like my Charmed area there. The three little monkeys.
We have a P3 neon sign over here.
That's amazing. I didn't even have one of those.
Yeah, Word of the Witches sounds like a great title and a great idea.
This is Finola Hughes, and you're listening to Words of the Witches, a Charmed podcast.
Keep up the good work. You're looking good.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome back, Spellworders. It has been a moment. It has been a month since we last spoke. Since I was last talking to you. Yeah, so this is the official start of our season 2. We're not quite into the comics yet, but we are kicking off our week of celebrating Charm's 24th birthday. So we're having a Charmed birthday celebration for the anniversary. So we're going to have today's episode, then we're going to have another one on Wednesday, and then 2 on Friday on Charm's actual birthday, October 7th. And on that day is when we will start getting into the comics. We'll have an introduction and cover issue 0 of the comics. And I do have to come clean. You are going to be receiving these episodes a little bit out of order. The ones that you're going to get first are actually recorded after the ones that will be coming after. And we've recorded all of these episodes up until issue number 2, all in September. So you're going to get some pre-recorded stuffs, but they're all good, I promise you. Oh my gosh, there's so much announcements. All right, so we do have the sad news that Coolio, who played the Lazarus Demon in Merry-Go-Round, has died at 59, very suddenly. So we're going to miss him. But also, we have lost Zach Estrin, who was a writer on Charmed. He died at 51. And Curtis Keel, another writer, wrote about how much he is sad about the passing because Zach and Chris Levinson wrote some of the best Charmed episodes that we know. Morality Bites, my favorite episode. P3H2O, Pre-Witched, Is There a Woogie in the House? And they're also responsible for creating the character of Leo. So we have lost some really wonderful Charmed alums again. And this whole year we've been losing some really wonderful people who have brought the show to life for us. So it's sad but I'm glad that we have the opportunity with this podcast to honor them and make their deaths mean something and make them known so that we can honor them and respect them in our own way. So hopefully we can do that. And if you haven't been living under a rock, you know that Holly Marie Combs, Drew Fuller, and Brian Krause have started their own Charmed podcast. It was like shortly after we finished our first season, they started their show, a rewatch podcast called House of Hallowell. Yeah, and it's wildly successful. Anytime there's a podcast with actors from the show, if you don't have anything else to listen to besides this show, definitely check out that one. Also, I want to mention something that was brought to my attention. In the past, I talked about how we never see Leo drive or driving, and how that's kind of a canonical error in the books when he was supposed to be driving, and the only time we ever see him drive or interest in driving is in Veo con Leos when he wants that truck. However, Nisha, who was a guest in the War and Witches episode, pointed out to me that in the Lost Pictures show, when the soothsayer switches Piper and Leo's bodies, Leo is the one that gets in the driver's seat. I mean, it is Piper's body, but Leo goes there. So we are under the impression that Leo drove there. Even though we don't actually see Leo in the driver's seat, it's supposed to be him there. So that is our clue that Leo has driven and knows how to drive. Although, when did he get a license? So was he driving illegally? Does he pull out his license from 1937 before he died the first time? Maybe. I don't know. But either way, very good call, Nisha. Very good eagle eye. Thank you for that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Finally, we did get another review on iTunes that I would like to read to you. It's 5 stars from Charmed 101. It says, new to podcast. I love it, especially Book 8. I forgot who was co-hosting with you, but the chemistry was great. By the way, from Wisconsin too, so hey. I love the word of the day and the games. I'm sure I'll be writing another review. LOL, you're doing a great job, so you can only get better. Thank you, Charmed 101. Thanks for giving us a review, and I'm glad you found us. So continue listening. I do think I get better as I go, and I love the variety of guests that come on. So I hope you continue to stick around and hope you hear your review read in this episode. But let's move on to the moment you've all been waiting for. Oh my grams, this is my interview with Paul Ruditis. Wow, what an amazing creator. So something like this would normally be a bonus episode, but because Paul is very much a part of what this podcast is all about, we cover the comics, we cover the novels, we cover pretty much everything he's written in the Charmed universe we're going to be covering. I'm making this a regular episode, not a bonus episode. And with regular episodes come word of the days. So let's move on to our word of the day and get started with my Paul Ruditis interview. Which word of the day? Today's word is a phrase, Theban alphabet. The Theban alphabet is used as an alternative to the Latin alphabet. It was used by early modern occultists and is popular with the Wicca movement. It is also known as the witches' alphabet. It is used by witches to write spells, inscriptions, and other texts. It serves to disguise the meaning of a text and to give it a mystical quality.
You haven't even read that?
Wait, what are you doing with the book?
So he has the confidence to finish the story.
Hear now the words of the witches.
This is Kevin, and welcome to Words of the Witches, the Charmed podcast that will guide you through the lesser-known published material in the Charmed universe and decide how it fits into the grand narrative of the TV series. All right, so welcome to a very special episode of Words of the Witches. I'm your host, Kevin, and today I have writer Paul Ruditis joining me. Ah!
Hello.
Hello. Fangirl scream, wave, hi, yes. Now, if you're familiar with this podcast and, Charmed in general, Paul's name should sound familiar.
And you pronounced it correctly, the last name. Nice.
Good. Well, I was struggled with that for a while because I'm like, how does it go? But then I watched a video of you at San Diego Comic-Con, and I'm like, aha, now I know for a fact. So, but yeah, you're forever associated with the Charmed lore outside of the series, writing, official companions and novels and comics, and now the Illustrated Storybooks. So yeah, you're deep in the Charmed universe.
Yes. I've been quite associated with it. I've been very lucky to be able to be associated with it for as long as I have.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous just because, I pride myself on being a Charmed expert, and but now I'm like, oh, you're here. It's like, oh man. So...
Okay, well, first of all, don't be nervous because you've just read all the books more recently than I have. You probably know the books better than I do right now. I'm a little nervous that I probably mix things up.
Yeah, and I would read those growing up, because I started watching the show when I was 10 on original air date. I saw every episode on original air date, and as the books were coming out, I was reading them in school and pre-ordering them, and it was crazy. And now it's like a new journey here doing the podcast. So
awesome. Well, I commend you for your diligence and your work. I know it's an undertaking, and it's a really great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. I'm excited, and I'm glad that you were a big part of that. So
thank you.
So you wrote your first book in school in 9th grade or something like that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't really a book. I mean, yes, I wrote my first manuscript when I was in high school.
Okay.
It was awful. I actually still have a copy of it hidden away in a closet. I can't even look at it. But I've always wanted, I was an avid reader when I was growing up. My mom introduced me to reading, and we would just lay on her bed together, and she'd read her mystery novel, and I'd be reading whatever kid's book, and my sister would be there reading, and so we'd all just be reading together. And I just always wanted to write. Specifically, I wanted to write young adult books. I really even though I was always reading as a child, I really got obsessed with reading when I was a teen. And it was really that got me sort of wanting to write and, just doing some dabbling on the side. And I'm just talking about pastime kind of stuff, nothing serious, nothing, and fun little lighthearted stories, not like literary magazine stuff. I was like reading Christopher Pike books, very mass market YA stuff. And I wanted to write that. And I just sat down one day and just started writing a story, using all of the typical fantasy tropes that I know are like completely overdone, but I didn't know. I was still learning. And I just sort of like wrote a whole story out just for the heck of it. And it didn't go anywhere. I mean, it was, nothing, but it proved to me that I could tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And that got me, when I went to college, I studied theater. I was a directing major, but I took as many writing classes as I could. I took playwriting, creative, all different kinds of writing, and film classes, so I could learn the craft of writing. And always with the dream of being a writer, but I never really thought being a writer was a job that you could attain.
Sure.
My dad was a police officer. My mom was a medical assistant. We lived a typical life, and the idea of a writer would be like the idea of working in Hollywood one day. I lived in Philadelphia. This was across the country. It was like, this is something other people do. So yeah. So after college, I'm just sort of walk you through.
Sure.
After college, I just wound up like applying to UCLA for their screenwriting program, and I didn't get in. But I got into like this offshoot program, which was a professional screenwriter, a certificate. Anyway, long story short, that got me out to Los Angeles. And then I was like, oh, okay, maybe this writing thing could become something. And then I got into it in probably the strangest way possible. Was I got a job as a tour guide at Paramount Pictures. Yeah. So, and my day was like literally walking around the outsides of sets, because the Paramount tour is not like the Warner Brothers tour or the Universal tour where you get into things. You're just walking around like the outside of buildings. Maybe occasionally you might sneak into like the Wings set, or maybe if you're really, really lucky, like Frasier. But like you would never get on a Star Trek set or anything. You'd just be walking people around buildings. But anyway, long story longer. We also did temp work around the lot, just filling in offices around the lot. And I got to do temp work in the licensing division. And I didn't really know what licensing was. I was a big fan of Star Wars growing up, and then Star Trek when I got older. And I had all the Star Wars toys, but I didn't understand like the business of making toys and the business of, and I started reading Star Trek books when I was in college, and I didn't understand the whole business of making those books. And the fact that the studio works with the publishers and oversees them and stuff like that. So I kind of got in a back door there. I started temping, and then I started working there, and that got me into like working on those books. Okay. And that was the roundabout way that got me into eventually one day writing those books. So
crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, I just had to run off running there. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all good. It's all fascinating, knowing the journey. Because I was a theater major in college too. I think I talked to you. I was doing Cinderella, and I don't do anything with my degree, but I got a theater degree. But there it is.
Yeah. Well, my theater degree prepared me for life.
Yes.
It didn't prepare. Like no one hired me at Paramount Pictures based on the fact that I studied directing. Like, but I learned a lot about writing actually on the side stuff. So, and that came into play in my career.
Crazy to think that Charmed would one day shoot and film at Paramount Studios.
And it wasn't there when it started. It wasn't there when it started.
Not until season 7.
Right. It was just such a weird coincidence that it sort of came around. Yeah.
And they shot in Studio 14, which is the same studio that Glee ended up shooting in afterwards.
You do know your history there. Yeah. One of the biggest sound stages that 14 and 15 come together to form one of the biggest sound stages in Hollywood. And 15 was where they filmed the Birdcage. It's where they filmed the Star Trek First Contact. They filmed, the tour, it stays with you.
So, I was getting into, in my brain, all the novels came first because they started first. But yeah, you're saying that you started with the Book of Three. So how did you begin to be connected with the Charmed brand?
Okay, so I actually, while I was working at Paramount, um, there was another company that started working on the licensing program for Charmed. So this was the people, Simon & Schuster were always the publishers of Charmed. Simon & Schuster were publishing most of, you probably read a lot of them if you read Beyond Charmed, but most of the big name young adult series that were out around that time were being published by Simon & Schuster. This would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, one of the biggest publishing programs of all time, Full House.
Full House. Roswell. Yeah.
Yeah, Roswell, exactly. So I was working with them in a licensor capacity on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, on different projects like that. And at that time, another company that went out of business that was sort of related, all sort of under the Viacom umbrella, because, you know, Viacom was owned by Viacom, and Paramount and CBS have all been sort of owned like together, separate. They've had a weird shared history. So anyway, this other company created the Charmed program, the Charmed publishing program with Simon & Schuster. That company went out of business or was absorbed by Viacom. I can't remember exactly how you would phrase it, but at which point I was already a fan of Charmed. I was watching it just because I loved Holly Marie Combs from her days of
Picket Fences. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like I love Simon. I love Alyssa. Like Alyssa, oh my God, who's the boss? Absolutely. But like, I was such a Holly Marie Combs fan from Picket Fences that I was like, I'm watching this. So I fell in love with the show. And then we started doing the publishing. So like I was overseeing Sabrina the Teenage Witch, I started overseeing the Charmed novels, which was only for a very brief period of time because I left Paramount soon thereafter. But I got to like meet Aaron Spelling and like talk to Aaron about like what he wanted from the books and what the expectations were. So that's how I first got involved with Charmed. But then but like I said, it was only like a few months that I was really involved before I left Paramount, because around that time, one of the editors at Simon & Schuster that I had been working with, she knew I was a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I couldn't work on anything that I was overseeing. I couldn't write any like Sabrina the Teenage Witch books or anything like that. But she asked me, she knew I was a writer. She knew from working together that I knew how to tell a story. I knew how to, you know, fix plot holes. I knew how to do all of that stuff. So she asked me to write a Buffy the Vampire Slayer short story. And I just was so like, oh my God, this was my dream. So that got me writing professionally. And then soon thereafter, I left Paramount. So I was no longer working at Paramount. So then I could start writing on some of the projects that I had used to oversee. So even then, I didn't actually, like, I kind of eased in because Sabrina the Teenage Witch is a younger kind of show. You know, I was doing fiction writing for that. And, you know, Charmed, and I really, you know, doing a Buffy short story is, you know, a little bit easier than doing a full-on novel. So I wasn't quite ready to do novels for, like, because Charmed is a bit more, well, not a bit more mature. Charmed was more mature than Sabrina. So I didn't really think about writing for Charmed, like, at all. Until one day they asked, they needed someone to come in and co-write the Book of Three. So they had Diana Gallagher, who's an incredible writer. I love Diana Gallagher. Yeah. She was writing the episode summaries and the episode parts, but they needed someone in Los Angeles that could go to the set and interview the actresses. So I was local. I had already done a number of behind the scenes books. You know, The West Wing. I was working on Star Trek Voyager, and so they were like, Paul, do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, I would love to. wait, I can hang out on set and interview the actresses and the cast? Okay, yeah.
And you visited during the season 5 finale, right? Where they're filming that?
Oh my God, okay. Yes. So, and it was funny because Drew Fuller was there, and they're like, do we want to interview Drew? We don't know what's going to happen. We didn't know he was going to be back for the whole next season, so we didn't wind up interviewing him. But like, I was there for those scenes and all. It was really great. So a lot of time. So some of the scenes that you're watching with the gods, know that I'm off to the side somewhere.
Hi, this is Kevin from the future. It was at this moment where I thought to myself, there really gods, there are titans. But I didn't want to correct Paul Ruditis. I mean, who am I to correct Paul Ruditis? But I thought in my brain and just carried on. And I should give Paul credit because he tweeted shortly after we did this interview. It says, following the podcast interview, I'm doing that thing where I'm like, wait, I meant to say titans, not gods. There were titans. So I knew what he meant. Paul knew what he meant. It's just, when you're talking, things come out wrong. And I totally get that. So yes, he self-corrected himself, and I wanted to make sure people knew that he knew.
So that was the first time that I ever really wrote for Charmed. And then it started a whole 20-year at this point relationship with it.
Yeah. So you watched the show because of Holly, but were you like super familiar with it then, or were you just kind of casual watcher?
Oh no, I was watching every episode. I was a fan. And you really, for these kinds of books, you have to be a fan because you can't fake it, because you'll get caught. I mean, people make mistakes. I make mistakes and stuff. I freely admit it, because there's a lot of episodes and there's a lot, and they weren't always the best with the continuity.
Sure.
So you have to know the show, because if you don't know the show, you're going to screw something up, but also it's going to be a miserable experience, because you have to get into these characters' heads, and you have to know who they are, and they have to sound like them, and they have to do things that they should do. And if you don't know it, and I know that there are writers out there who kind of skate by and don't sort of, like, they'll do a little bit of research and then call it a day.
Sure.
But you've really got to know these shows.
Mm-hmm. And it's clear when you're writing that, the voices come out, these characters come out. So I feel you.
Thank you.
And have you, because you had to write for other shows, did you engross yourself in the same way as Charmed for those? How did you?
I watch a lot of television. I've always watched a lot of television.
Okay.
So for the most part, it's very rare that I've ever taken on a project that I wasn't familiar with the show. Okay. I will say the one time I did that, I completely lied. I was like, "Oh yeah, I love the show," because I knew it was a show I could pick up really quickly. It wasn't to do. Also, there's a difference between writing a novel and writing a behind-the-scenes guide.
Yeah,
I would never, ever, ever, ever attempt a novel for a show that I've never written. A behind-the-scenes guide, you can fake it. So, like, I would fake it for, like, the reality show, The Girls Next Door. One of my editors asked if I ever saw the show. I said, "Oh my God, I love the show." I'm like, I've never seen an episode. But it turned out to be one of the most fun books I've ever done, just because it was a fun experience with I've never, it was a reality show, which is very cool. Anyway. But you got to know the shows. You really have to know the shows. For everything that I've ever written, specifically in fiction, especially, I've always been a fan of the show first. Which is a shame, because then once you get so into it, you're no longer watching it like a typical fan. You kind of watching it differently, which then takes a little bit out of the enjoyment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes sense. It's almost like too deep.
Right.
So when you visited the Charm set, was there anything that you learned that was extra special for the writings, or?
It was, well, actually, the one thing was I found it very inspirational. And that's actually what got me into writing the fiction. Because, like, I was interviewing Dorian Gregory. And as he and I just had such a great rapport. He was such a great guy. He gave such a good interview. And I was just having so much fun that as I was talking to him, I was like, he needs to be on the cover of a book. Because most of the covers have been the girls.
Sure.
And occasionally they might have someone else. But it's, there's only so many times you can do, the three actresses in different poses in different kind of order. So I was like sitting there and I'm like, I'm having such a good time talking to the actor that I want to find a way to highlight the character. And that got me to create a story for him. And that got me to, the first
The Brewing Storm. Yeah.
So that was being behind the scenes was, it was a great, just fun experience. That on the first time I went behind the scenes, I really, to be perfectly honest, I don't remember all that much other than being there when they were filming with the gods. But I distinctly remember just sitting in Dorian's trailer and just like chatting and having such a great connection with him that he inspired my first novel.
I love that. He has such a robust laugh, and you don't get to see it so much on the show. But when he laughed, it's just like the whole room shakes almost. Like,
he's such a great person.
I love that.
And just getting to meet the actresses was just, I mean, that was the first time I got to ever meet them. And, you know, that was just a fun experience. Again, it's this weird thing where you're in a professional situation. So you're being a professional, but you're also a fan. And you're like eating, like seriously, Alyssa Milano and I were roughly the same age. I literally grew up with Alyssa Milano. And then I'm going to meet her. And I have to be professional about it. And I have to be all like, oh, hi, very nice to meet you. Let's do the interview. And all inside, I'm like, oh my God, it's Alyssa Milano.
Right.
So like that's always a fun element of what I do.
And The Brewing Storm was like a lot of people's favorite book too for a while. That's like a lot of your books are like the favorites of the series.
Oh, that's sweet. That's nice.
I'm a big Elemental fan, so when I was like, oh, all these elementals coming together. Ooh.
I am too, and that's what I really liked. I wanted to tell a story with elementals. I wanted to also bring back a character from the show that we had seen, and that character wound up being someone that I continued to work with in the comics.
Yeah,
so,
Tyler.
Yeah. So, and then he got to grow into his own supporting role, and then Pat Shand took him even further in his stories.
Sure.
So I really like that we were able to do that.
Yeah. Was there a particular feature about his character that you was drawn to that you kept using him?
Well, it was really not necessarily. I mean, I love elementals. I love elemental magic. So in choosing him, it then became, you know, he was a character that I had brought back, and I felt a connection having written a novel with him. That when I was looking again, when with the comic books, I feel, I mean, I know we'll be talking about those in a minute. With the comic books, my one regret is I kind of went a little bit too much into the well of who can I bring back? Who can I bring back? And I was like, let's stop bringing back everybody. But like, he was one that I liked that we could bring back, that we could weave into the world, and we can make him more a part of the world.
Cool. I like that. And I want to touch about your Leo Rising book for a little bit too, because that was a cool take, you know, putting, you know, the men of Charmed in a more pivotal role. What led you to go that route?
Well, that was another one where I was like, we knew it was getting to the end of the series. We knew that the books were, you know, this was the second from the last book. I think Diana did the last book.
Yeah.
We knew it was coming to an end, and I was like, well, I really want to cover with the guys on them, especially because, like, you know, the Sons were so huge at that time. Like, everybody wanted to spin off with them. And I was like, and I knew, like, I didn't know if anything was going to happen. I kind of felt like, you know, the show was ending, and there wasn't going to be that spin off. So I was like, well, let's give, you know, this was an opportunity to give the fans another story with those characters, and also to give them a cover. And again, by the time you get to like 44 books, it's like, seriously, how many different ways can you rearrange?
Yeah.
And what can you stick in the background that makes it, you know, look different from the other one? So this was a chance to get the cover looking different, to highlight these actors, especially Brian. Brian is one of those. He was one of the greatest, just people. Just everybody on the crew loved him to death. He just had such a genuine connection. I connected with him, you know, whenever I interviewed him, and just getting him that kind of, you know, getting him that cover, getting him that story, just sort of was like, that's where it started. Like with both of those two, you know, with the first and the last. In the Simon & Schuster series, it was really about connecting with what I wanted to do differently visually with the book, like how I wanted the book to stand out on a shelf from the ones that came before it, and that created the story. That the story evolved from there.
That's cool, and it definitely does stand out. And I think people are another one that they're drawn to. It's like this is different. I want to see a story with them. How great!
Right.
So. Of the books you've written, what is your favorite Charmed novel, and what is your favorite non-Charmed work?
It's really hard to say. I mean, it's really, well, I mean, okay, in the Charmed novel, I mean, it's just hard to say. It's just hard.
Yeah.
I love As Puck Would Have It just because I love that character of Puck that I created, which just sounds so egotistical. But, Puck I was modeling after Q from The Next Generation, Star Trek The Next Generation. And I kind of felt like I love that kind of playfulness. So I love that element. But I love The Brewing Storm because it was really the first. It was the first Charmed novel. It was the first time I wrote in this world. I feel like for me, it was my strongest, connection to Charmed. So that's I would say that's probably my favorite Charmed novel. Although I love The War on Witches, the ebook that was done later, but that was a different, that was when Charmed was like a little bit more mine. That sounds horrible. Sure. That sounds egotistical to say, but it was like, it was a world that
it was in your hands at the point. Yeah.
Evolved to.
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of like, mentally, at least emotionally, maybe ownership there that kind of like I'm continuing the story in a way. But in terms of like non-Charmed book, well, my favorite is my young adult series Drama. Drama is my favorite thing that I've ever done. It's a young adult series set at the
theater.
Yes, theater world. It's all of my friends in a book. Except we were never rich because it's set in it's a very posh private school in Malibu, where it's the gist of it was I wanted it to be about a gay protagonist who felt like he was not the lead in his own life, but his story in the first book especially wasn't about the fact that he was gay. It was just, this is who I am. Maybe I'm not out yet because it was a different time, and but it wasn't meant to be a coming out story until later. But it was just like, it was an element of his character, and the world that he was living in was so crazy that it's like, this is the normal. The crazy are the other things that are in the world. So, and that was just a fun series that I really enjoyed writing. But it was actually Charmed that led me there because I never. This is, again, it's so weird to talk about yourself. It's so weird to, like, normally I interview people. I'm not.
Sure.
But it was actually through Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Charmed that I found out I was funny.
Okay.
I didn't know. I never knew. I've never thought of myself as funny. But the comedy that I put into Sabrina the Teenage Witch and Charmed, like, connected with readers. And that was like the commentary that I got back most was how funny things were. And that gave me the confidence to do something like Drama, which if you're going to call something with a book drama with an exclamation point, it better be funny. So so it gave me the confidence as a writer to try something that is pure silly. I mean, Drama is a silly, lighthearted joke of a series that has deeper meaning underneath it, but it's a comedy. And that's what I love to write, is anything to make people laugh and to just have a silly good time.
That's so great. I have to read those. I'm going to get on that.
Well, I like them.
Yeah. And, a theater person is me. I was a high school theater kid, so, it works. So when the comics started, when the idea of the comics came, were you approached right away, or did you just jump in and say, I'll do it? Or
that was so, because I had this connection to the books and I had connection to the folks it was CBS at this point. They really knew, they knew they needed someone who was familiar with the show and who could be trusted to help sort of guide the show. So the folks at CBS very kindly and very generously suggested me to the editors at Zenescope, the owners of Zenescope. And they were like, he's never written a comic book before, and I never had. I mean, I had read many comic books, a big comic book fan, but I had never written a comic book. But I knew Charmed, and Zenescope is a really great independent comic book company, and they specialize in comic books that aren't necessarily licensed comic books. They had never really done they'd done a smaller license also in nonfiction, but they had never done anything this large. So they knew they needed someone who had a history with licensing, who also knew the brand and could shepherd the brand. Because the biggest thing about doing licensed books is you didn't create this world. I didn't create Charmed. I am just lucky enough to come in on the journey. I've never written an episode. I've never, I interviewed the writers, which was a great experience. Unfortunate, though, history has proven with that. But anyway, we don't talk about that. But I've never been like a part of the show. So I understand the rule is, like you can't kill anybody, because at the end of your book, they got to come back, because you can't do something like that. You have to play by the rules that are set up by the show. You have to play, but you can't suddenly go crazily and turn the story into something different because the fandom is going to not like it. And also, like, you just can't, you have to play by the rules. It's basically the number one thing is you have to play by the rules, but still find creativity in that, still find a way to tell the story. And especially since Charmed was off the air, there was more leeway to tell the story, to do things that they wouldn't necessarily have done on the show, and start taking it, in new directions. So the folks at CBS very kindly suggested me to Zenescope. Zenescope was like, sure, bring them in. They partnered me with Raven Gregory to write the first few comic books, because, to teach me what the style of comics is. And he was a great partner. We really had a great time brainstorming, but pretty soon, like, I picked it up pretty quickly, I guess, because they pretty much, evolved. So it was just
go at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Zenescope they have such a great machine of output that Raven was like doing so much. It's like Raven probably was like, okay, I need to focus on this. He's good. Go, let him go.
Yeah.
So pretty much soon I was, writing and editing as well, because I knew what the approvals process is. Like, things have to go and get approved, and there's a whole machine when it comes to writing a licensed book that you don't have with writing a book that's unlicensed. Yeah, there's a machine there, but that machine is contained usually with the publisher. You've got your writer, maybe the writer has beta readers or people in the writer's life that read something. Then it goes to the editor and the publishing house, and that machine, there's a machine there. But the additional machine of a studio or a licensor is a whole different kind of machine, because you will get notes or requests that are purely political.
Wow.
Or purely have nothing to do with storytelling, have to do with something that you don't want to step on someone's toes, or you don't want to, there's always this concern that because you're in this world that you didn't create, that someone who created the world or someone participated in the world might have a problem with it. And you don't want to upset those people. And again, you want to also, it comes back to the fandom. You want to serve the fandom. You want to give the fandom what they want, or not necessarily give them what they want, but give them what they will enjoy, whether or not they knew they wanted it. So there's a whole machine there. So I forget where we started on that question, but CBS very kindly suggested me to Zenescope, and that's what got me into writing the comic books.
Yeah, well, that was all fascinating. I mean, that's crazy. It's are they going to challenge me? Are they going to not like something? I get that. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing is, like, CBS, and I'm not just saying this because I know the people and I started out at Viacom, but like, they're one of the best at being hands off, at being like, especially since, and maybe it's particularly because I know I come from this world, and I mean, they've certainly told me not to do things, and they've certainly said, hey, you're starting to get too far, but they definitely trust the writers to tell the story, and to stay true to the characters, and to do it. And also they know that, I know the show backwards and forwards, so it makes their job a little bit easier. They're like, Paul's got this. Like, anytime they've asked me a question like, would they really do this? I'm like, well, they did it in this episode, and that's why I'm doing it here. And, like, I can cite chapters for why I know that they would do that.
You're like the go-to guy. My circle of friends, I'm like the go-to guy. So it's so cool. All right. What was the biggest difference or challenge in writing for the comics versus your other works before?
Oh, it's an entirely different style of writing. It's so visual, and the fact that you have to write, like, first of all, it's 22 pages. It's hard 22 pages.
Yeah.
And you've got to stay within that. You've got to tell the story, but the visuals help you tell the story. So you don't have to explain things. You have to you have to marry the dialogue and the visuals in a way that tells the story for the reader. And sometimes, you know, like you think you're saying something and then you see it and you're like, oh, that's not what I meant. Or you say something and you see it the way that you see it, but then the readership gets it and they're like, they might see it differently because, you know, you're getting scenes, you're getting snippets of scenes that together tell a story. And you have to be very concise with your language, so that you have to also be, you have to know, like, you have to visualize it in a way that the dialogue makes sense. So when the artist renders it, you've got people speaking in the order that they're supposed to speak so that the letterer doesn't have to come in and be like word balloons all over the place. So it's just, it's really like, it really is like writing the description of a piece of art, which it is. It's a piece of art. These are, and you're guiding the artist to then go and create. So it's a lot of fun. It's a big challenge. And again, the concise, just 22 pages, telling a full story in 22 pages is just really a challenge.
Yeah, and I could imagine it's hard to, you know how it's going to come across too. Something that might be in your head might not be what viewers see. So yeah, tricky.
And then of course and then there's the real world challenge. I mean, let's just, we can talk about it. If you've looked at the comic books, every single one looks different. And that was a challenge of scheduling, and we had so many different wonderful artists. I made so many great friends on those comics. But the unfortunate thing about it was the real world situation of scheduling, of artists getting other jobs and, relationship stuff. We wound up having different artists on different books, and you would tell a story where you would create, when I didn't always know who the artist was going to be when I would create it, and I would create something, I would create an image that might be a callback to another book that would look totally different because it was a different artist. And, that's my one thing. As much as I loved all of the artists, and I really did love all of the people that we work with on the comic books, my one regret about it, if I may, is that we didn't have that consistency of
cohesion,
art style, right? Yeah. So that it carried through, which was one of the unfortunate challenges. I still think we told some really great stories, but I would have loved that cohesive look throughout.
Sure, yeah, I get that. I want to know a little bit about your convention experience, because was that your first time doing a convention? How was the promotional like? Okay.
No, that was my second time doing a convention.
Okay.
My first time doing a convention, I had made I was on a media tie-in panel. It was San Diego Comic-Con, and I was on a media tie-in panel, and it was after I had done the Buffy episode guide. And I had made a mistake. Because I didn't know that I had interpreted something incorrectly about Spike and Buffy's relationship that Joss Whedon had, quite frankly, I think he retconned it after the fact. But anyway, I had interpreted it incorrectly. And let me tell you, the Spuffy fans, the Spuffies came for me. And so the first experience I had with the convention was they were actually planning to protest me and another author, a wonderful friend of mine, Nancy Holder, had written also a Buffy and Angel book that was set during the time that Buffy and Angel were together. But the fandom they were very pro Spike at the time, and they felt, beholden to Spike. So the fact that her book came out, even though it was written, in the past, at the same time, I had made a mistake in the episode guide. Ooh, we had some fans angry at us. They didn't actually wind up protesting. But we were all sort of batten down the hatches. But that was my first convention experience.
Okay.
Charmed was my second convention experience. And Charmed was a much bigger room. Big room. I think a lot of people in the room were waiting for the next people, because when I would say things about Charmed, the reaction would be towards the front of the room, and then it would get lost that no one in the back of the room was reacting. Hey, what are you here for? But yes, that was my second convention experience, Charmed, and that was the big room by far.
Okay.
And that was, everyone was very, the people that were there for the comic books were very excited about it, because it was what, 4 years, I think.
Yeah.
4 years since the show went off the air. So so it was great to be able to tell those stories and to continue telling those stories and to get there and to connect with the fans. And also like doing the signings was great because that's when you have the one-on-one with people who like love the show. And this is like, even though I'm a writer and I'm a fan of the show, and connecting with the other fans of the show on that personal level is it's just unforgettable.
Yeah, it's so great when you can talk to people who are passionate about something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the ideas, the camaraderie. It's great.
Yeah,
I've heard that the PJ nickname for Phoebe's daughter is ironic because they are your initials.
Yes, they are. That wasn't intended. It was just I was doing something where I wanted Phoebe, even though I know that there was a history in the show where it was, you know, where it was, you know, like Piper was going to name her child Prue. I really wanted Phoebe's daughter to be Prue. I wanted to show that they had that, because I know that connection. And but I also didn't want her to be like little Prue. So and I was looking for different ways to, and it was just like I really love the name combination, but I also wanted it to have a nickname, and I just wanted to use the initials, and I almost stopped using it because they are my initials. But then I was like, I liked the name, and I wanted to, and I just figured, why not? Let's do it. And quite frankly, no one would know it was my initial. Well, no, that's not true because I was writing under it in different ways. So I guess people would know it was my initials. But like, people wouldn't have made the connection if I probably didn't. If I probably just shut my mouth and not said anything.
Right. Because my middle name is Joseph, so I had a nickname of KJ growing up. So I was like, you know, it's kind of a.
There you go.
Yeah. I am curious because you had the ebooks, and they were having steps made to get them printed and published. So what is the story with that? What actually happened there?
Oh, it's not an exciting story. The company went out of business. The company went out of, and I feel, and I hate that it went out of business. Not so much because my books never got printed.
Pat Chand, you know,
Pat's never came out.
Yeah,
and I gotta tell. I mean, I've been trying. I work in publishing. I've been trying to get them out. Pat knows. Like I think he tweeted about it last year after I talked. I'm like, hey Pat, where are those stories? I tried. I'm not going to say I came close. I did not come close, but I was making a concerted effort to try and get Pat's books out in some way, shape, or form. I failed. I'm still hopeful, but the further we get away from the problem is the further we get away from the comic books,
the less the audience
is going to because that was one of the things when we did the ebooks. I was very much a proponent for like, look, we need some kind of explanation for why, because we made a decision to set them after the comic books because we knew that there was a large fandom of the comics that still wanted to continue with these characters. And we created this, you know, 9th and 10th seasons, whatever. And we wanted to continue that. But I wanted like something at the beginning of each one that like said, here's what's happening to date, because we also knew that we were going to get fans that never knew. Because to this day, I see people online like, I never knew there were comic books. It's like we were really promoting them, we were pushing them, we really were, we tried, but like they didn't know. So like we wanted some kind of introduction. I wanted some kind of introduction that said like, here's the story to date. Here's the continuation for anyone who didn't read the comic books. Now we're so far from the comic books. If we were to do something like that, and I've thought about different ways we would do that because I've literally been trying to get them published. You know, we would have some kind of like summary of what happened so that people would know. I would love for them. I haven't even read them, to be perfectly honest. I would love to read them because Pat's an amazing writer. I've hired him many times, and I continue to want to work with Pat. And this is, again, one of the great things that, you know, these friendships that I've gotten and these professional relationships that I've gotten with these people have come out of Charmed. You know, Pat and I never would have known each other but for Charmed. And now I've worked with him a number of times. He's a spectacular writer.
He's doing amazing things right now too. So
yeah, I love what he's doing with his comic books and his comic book company. I mean, just what the success he's having on Kickstarter. I mean, it's impressive.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah. So anyway, the company. Back to the company went out of business, and that's just what happened. I mean, they were literally. I saw not an actual printed copy. I saw the page proofs. I saw the book laid out in pages.
Yeah, wow.
It just never, I don't know, maybe it did get, I mean, as far as I know, it could have been printed and then got pulped. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in, because my work was technically done when the ebook published. You know, they came back to me to ask me to proofread, and I got to correct a mistake I had made, and which was great. But like, that was like, the books coming out would have been a bonus for me, just in that it would have been in stores and fans would have, readers would have gotten to read it and physically own a copy. You know, my relation, because like, work for hire, you don't get royalties on books. You get a work
Stipend
for hire
or whatever. Yeah,
you're done, you're paid, and like, okay, well, whatever. And I would have loved to see it just for the fans to have it. For me to have, I don't even have a physical. I don't have a copy of it. Like, I have a copy of the manuscript. I don't have a Kindle, so I don't actually have a copy of the ebook. I just have the manuscript, to be honest.
Yeah, I had them all pre-ordered, ready to go, because they're on Amazon. I'm like, oh, when is it coming out? When is it coming out? And I was just like heartbroken.
Moving it, and I'm like, it's not coming out, folks. It's never coming out. Why is it still moving? And I had no conversations with them. I had no clue what was going on. Pat knew a little bit more than me because Pat was in it. But I was just like, I was completely I couldn't know. And then when I did know, I wasn't allowed to say anything for a little bit, just because there were legal things that had to go on. But anyway, it's one of the things that I hate, and I would love to do it. I would love to do it as a bind up, like you put them both together. And I would love to find a way to do it, but I've yet to be successful at that. So,
well, we're all hoping one of these days.
Well, now what I feel is I'm going to suddenly on social media, so is it working, Paul? What is it, Paul? I know that I'm going to get probably not going to happen. I tried. I promise you I tried. But I haven't fully given up hope. Okay. But yeah, no, it probably won't happen. And I feel bad about that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to happier times.
Okay.
Let's go on to this illustrated storybook. Charmed the Illustrated Storybook. How exciting.
Who'd have thought? Like, I was again, one of the folks at CBS I've known my entire career. And as we were doing this, I sent her an email. I'm like, did you ever imagine 20 years ago? Whenever it was, I literally remember that. Do you ever remember when we were sitting in Aaron Spelling's office 20 some years ago? Would you have ever imagined that we would be doing a picture book based on these characters? It's been such a weird journey. And the crazy part is, I didn't even come up with the idea for the picture book. A member of our acquisitions team, a member of our group at the company that I work at, she suggested it, and I'm like, well, duh.
Like, are you kidding me? Please, let's do it.
This is a trend now. These pop culture storybooks are a trend. They've been. I'm sure you've seen them.
Yeah.
We did one for the Goonies. We did one for the Muppet Christmas Carol. We've done It's a Wonderful Life, and we've got one coming out next year, Roman Holiday, because I know that there's this Audrey Hepburn fandom. So I was like, let's do a picture book on a romantic comedy from 50, 60 years ago. So Charmed came up in a meeting, and I was like, duh, let's do it. So we just reached out to CBS, and I was like, hey, can we do this? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. So we just sort of came up with a story that's a universal story, a story about sibling rivalry, about just being kids. The fact, again, as all Charmed fandom knows, Charmed is a story about three sisters who happen to be witches. And this is a story about three sisters doing what these three sisters do. They fight. And magic comes into play to help them get past their differences. And and it's just a simple, it's not adding to we're not adding to the mythology. We're not adding to the big challenge is, the fact that, we're talking about them at ages where they weren't witches, because they didn't know they were witches. Their powers were bound. So that was the first thing we had to kind of weave into. It's like, this did happen as far as we're concerned. This did happen, but everything does, this is the rules of, the rules of lice and stuff. At the end, we have to reset, and this isn't giving anything away. It's not a spoiler.
Sure.
The world continues on in the world the charmed ones knew. So we don't contradict, and we were very important. This was very important to us. We don't want to contradict this future that they have, where they're like, we forgot we were witches when we were really, really young.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to go into it making sure that we never contradicted that, because it's such a tenet. I mean, that's how the whole show was created. They didn't know they were witches, and that was very important to us.
Yeah. It's always kind of a cool thing, though, because you know that 70s episode is like a fan favorite amongst a lot of people. It's a very great episode. So this is kind of taking us into the next decade, into the 80s. So
we're in the 80s, absolutely.
Is there a specific year that it's set in?
I try to keep these things vague.
Okay.
I try to always keep them vague because it's very hard. It's very hard to establish an actual calendar on the show. The readers really wanted me to establish a calendar specifically with the comic books. When were each of the babies born? And I tried to stay as vague as possible because it's very hard it's just hard to establish an actual calendar.
Brain. Yeah.
So, and it's not necessarily my place to establish an actual calendar, because I don't want to contradict anything that the show laid out, but also the show was a little contradictory at times in and of
course. Plenty of times.
So definitely in the 80s. It's definitely the early 80s. I know exactly what ages they are, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. Because I'm thinking, because 1975 was that 70s episode, but when they went into Forever Charmed, it was like 1982. So when they got Grams from it, 1982. So I'm like, all right. Well, we know it's after Patty's death. So, okay.
Yes.
All right.
I'll just say it's the early 80s. It's the early 80s.
Okay. That's good.
So,
and I gotta tell you, I love Ria's artwork that when I've seen.
Great. She was so wonderful to work with. She took notes wonderfully. She just brought everything out perfectly. It's just she's an amazing artist, and I'm very excited that I got to work with her. So yeah, I can't wait for everyone to see it.
Yeah, like what I've seen, her art style has like a wonderful mix of like both simplicity and depth, and it like I can see the likenesses in there, and it's really pops. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. I know this might be too early to ask this, but is there still a possibility for a sequel storybook?
Anything's possible. It really depends on how it performs. I mean, and I don't know, like I would love to do something that brings in Paige. Because we didn't, I'll just be, again, spoiler alert, for those of you waiting for Paige, I didn't want to shoehorn her in just to shoehorn her in. And because also this is really geared toward, this is a children's storybook. It is a little text intensive. It's wordier than a lot of children's picture books. But it's really meant to be a story that parents can read to their children, and to have a random baby introduced that doesn't it was not, or a random infant at that page. I couldn't remember how old she was at the time, but a random child just randomly thrown in, it became too much of a challenge. So the idea of doing a story with Paige and finding a way that the story integrates Paige in a way that all four of them can be together would be cool. But also I would love to do other things. If this performs, and again, it's really up to, spread the word, people, spread the word.
Yeah.
Because if this performs well, I would love to do more. We do a lot of different kinds of publishing, at our company. And Charmed always gets to be like, Charmed, people don't necessarily understand and appreciate how successful Charmed was as a TV show. At times it gets lost a little bit in Buffy the Vampire Slayer's shadow, which is unfair, and it's a shame because it was such a big show with such a huge audience that it doesn't always get, when you're trying to bring it in the corporate world and you're trying to convince salespeople that there's an audience out there, it's hard because they don't necessarily treat it with the reverence of, say, a Buffy or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a numbers game. And I would love to do more. I've been actually trying to do I've never stopped trying to get charm books out there. A replica Book of Shadows. Tried an actual literal show approved one that actually
right
not what that's like cost effective also that people can afford. That can be mass produced so everyone can have it.
Sure.
So that kind of thing. I've wanted to get Pat's books. I want to get, I would love to do a Charmed tarot set. There's a whole world of Charmed out there that, the challenge is the further we get away from the TV show, the harder it is to convince people that the audience is still interested in the show.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know what it is, because the audience is massive. It's always been massive.
And it's global. It is global.
Yeah,
I am connecting with people all over the world in social media that I never would have met if it weren't for Charmed.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's a testament to what the actresses did, because even though the storylines might have been silly or goofy or something crazy was happening, they sold it every time. And that's what kept us coming back.
They did. And they did get some of the storylines and some of the costumes certainly got silly, but they committed to it. They committed to it every time. They knew that they may have known that they looked silly in the costumes, but they committed to the characters and they committed to the stories. But they still had that wink and the nod to the audience. They're like, we're playing a lot, we're having fun, and they had fun with the show. And it shows, and that's what I think the audience connects with. Yes, they connect with the story, they connect with the romance, but the fact that these actresses, this cast, not just the actresses, but the whole cast, had so much fun with it. And it was that way, when I got to visit the sets, you could tell these people loved, the show, and they were so just loving what they were doing. They committed to the show. So, the behind the scenes folks were an amazing crew of people. Just all coming together to work on this amazing show, and just the fact that it still exists to this day in some form, and that I get to be, like I said, some small part of that, is just really exciting to me.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really great place to end on, because amazing.
Okay.
Is there anything that you want to promote besides the Charmed Storybook? Anything you want to follow you?
The storybook comes out next week. I've got a copy of it here. Got a copy right here.
Oh.
So, and I'm just waiting. I'm just so excited for everyone to get to see it. And then, since I mentioned it, we've got another picture book, Roman Holiday, the Audrey Hepburn film. Roman Holiday. It's just a beautiful and lovely stylistic artwork with actually a writer that I've worked with before, McCall Ostow. And that's coming out in the springtime. It's our next picture book from our company, from Insight Editions or Insight Kids. Just buy our Charmed Illustrated. Tell your friends, brother. Thank you very much for this. This is just to think that someone would still be interested in interviewing me about Charmed this many years after the show has gone off the air. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you for doing this, and thank you for spreading the word about the publishing and all that you've been doing with this podcast. This is amazing.
It's so crazy hearing what people, either they haven't heard about the books or they're now interested in buying the books. So it's this whole podcast is bringing a resurgence back, which is really exciting. So
great. So thank you for doing what you do, and yes, continue spreading the word. Charm the Illustrated Storybook out next week. We're trying to get it into foreign territories. I'm hoping I'll hear more soon. The Frankfurt Book Festival is coming up soon, so they'll be trying to get it into other countries as well. So we're just trying to get this little book out to as many people as we can.
Yay. Yeah, I'll do my part. And yeah, everyone just tell your friends, tell the world.
Please do.
It's been great. And where can people follow you if they want to follow you on the social medias?
I'm so awful at social media, but occasionally I do tweet on Twitter at Paul Ruditis. I have an Instagram. I'll tell you right now, I never use it. Just find me on Twitter. I'm going to try and tweet more in the next week, especially. Definitely tweet about this coming out. Make sure everyone knows that they can see us talking or hear us talking about this. But yeah, that's basically it. Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, and everyone's welcome to tweet me. I sometimes respond. Sometimes I'm bad at responding. I'm bad at social media.
Life, Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me. And yeah, it's gonna be I think people will respond to this very well. So good.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, you can follow this podcast at Words of the Witches, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Words of Witches on Twitter. And yeah, we'll see you all next episode, I suppose. This is part of the Charm Celebration birthday thing, so you're gonna get a lot this week.
Okay.
but, yeah, but cool. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
bye. Until next time, Spellworders, your destiny still awaits.